Hello, everybody. Welcome to our program, which is Alpine Adaptations of Plants. My name is Liz Crocker, and I'm an educator, a learning program developer at the Royal BC Museum in British Columbia, Canada. Welcome, and we're here today with...
Hi, my name is Ken Marr. I'm a botanist. I study plant taxonomy. That's the science of naming plants, and I specialize in working in alpine habitats all across British Columbia.
Thanks, Ken. So to get started, yeah, and actually, yes, thanks for, we wanted to mention, oh, look at that. We've got people from all over. I meant to say that lots of students from the United States today. So welcome. And I see we've got kids from Nova Scotia and Vancouver Island and all over. So welcome everybody. And please feel free to type in the chat where you're joining us from. That would be great. We are going to ask you a couple questions in a little bit too. So please feel free to share with us through the chat. Ken and I will keep an eye on it. Sorry, there we go. Oh, that's funny. There we go. Now I can see it properly. Okay, so extreme adaptations. Ken Marr might take a little bit of exception to that title, and he'll explain why when he gets in there. So I want to acknowledge that the Royal BC Museum sits on the beautiful unsurrendered territories of the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations, also known as the Lekwungen speaking people here in southern Vancouver Island. So we're very grateful to be able to live and work in this beautiful territory. So if you aren't from around here, here's our map of Canada. That little red dot is where the museum is. We're way over on the west coast, on the southern tip of Vancouver Island. Hopefully you can visit us in person one day if you haven't had the chance to do so. And Victoria is the capital of the province of BC, British Columbia. We're way down there at the tip of the island. And this is what the museum looks like on a beautiful summer evening. It looks like this photo was taken. And Ken and I are in the building on the left. We're way over in the corner. The building on the right is where all the collections are. So there's lots of plant collections in there, I know. And then the exhibits are all over here, and we're way in the back there today. So I think, yeah, no, I'm going to stop my share. And before we go any further, and before I completely turn things over to Ken, we wanted to get some ideas. What do you think an alpine environment is like? We're going to stop at 3. Anybody, you can go ahead and type in the chat. How would you describe an alpine environment? What are some words to describe an alpine environment? Go ahead and type that in the chat. We'll see if we get any ideas there. Oh, and there's somebody from Carrie, is NC, North Carolina?
North Carolina.
North Carolina.
That's right.
Welcome, welcome. Oh, somebody's across the street from the museum. Great.
Come on over.
Yeah. Any ideas about what's an alpine environment like? Like, what's the temperature like? What might the plants be like? Cold and snowy. Okay, there's 2 words there. I'll put this here so everybody can see it. Cold. Yeah, thanks for those ideas. Snowy. One more. Do we have one more? Cold and snowy. Those are good words. Could describe it.
Windy. That's a good one.
Windy. And I can't, that might be a typo there.
Not many trees.
Okay, windy. Now we go. Okay, that's enough. Thank you. Windy. Oops, I've got window. Windy.
No trees.
No trees.
That's
okay.
Pretty key.
Okay. We're going to stop there. So we're going to share a short video of Ken up in an alpine area, right? And we're going to see what else we can find out about the alpine. I can get us on here. Stand by.
My name is Ken Marr, Curator of Botany at the Royal BC Museum. I'm standing in an alpine meadow that very few British Columbians will ever reach. I'm really fortunate to be here, and it's a beautiful day today. It isn't always so beautiful in the alpine. We're east of Prince George and south of Fort St. John, close to Monkman Provincial Park, and we're north of Wapiti Lake Provincial Park. And we're here collecting plants for the museum in order to document the biodiversity of the province. And we make collections, and then they go into the permanent collection at the museum, and anyone in the world can view those collections, and scientists constantly are asking us for information about them. A lot of plants are already known. The species that occur in British Columbia are known, but lots of areas have never been visited. And so here in the background you can see the tree line in the slope behind me, and the alpine zone is established above the tree line. So wherever temperatures are too low for trees to grow, the alpine vegetation takes over. It's a very low vegetation, adapted for rapid growth because of the short growing season, also adapted for getting wind exposure. Today is quite calm, but many days of the year it's very, very windy, and a tall stem would simply be knocked down. I'm sitting beside a little plant, one of my favorites, moss campion, because of the brilliant purplish pinkish flowers. It's not a moss, but it gets that name from kind of the cushion shape of it, and even the leaves might be reminiscent of moss leaves. This plant is an excellent example of adaptation and evolution in the alpine environment. Related species in this genus, Silene, are much taller plants. They could be up to this tall, even taller. But as plants adapted to the alpine environment, there's a significant advantage to being shorter. And the reason for that, as you might guess, or maybe you haven't guessed, is because the winds are strong and the growing season is short. So it's advantage to be short because you're not as buffeted by the wind, and it's also an advantage to be short because the plant is able to produce flowers very quickly.
Okay. Fantastic, Ken. Thank you for that. All right, so I heard a couple other things there. You did mention in the video some of the things that people have already talked about. It's cold, it's lots of wind, no trees. Was there anything else you heard or saw in the video that told you about what the alpine environment is like? There was a little something you mentioned about where the trees grow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Short plants. Yeah, short plants. Nice, thank you. Okay. See that? My messy writing, short plants, but it will help us remind us what we're gonna look at here. So now I'm gonna turn it over to Ken. You've got some pictures that you took, some photos you took on trips up into the alpine. So let's go ahead to that. And then I'll hand it over to you. Ooh, above the tree, short plants above, they are frozen. Oh, interesting. Okay, yes, you might talk about frost and freezing. Here we go. Currents, there we go. There we go. Okay.
Yeah,
Take it away.
yeah, those are all really good ideas. And when we talk about extreme environments, you know, for a lot of plants, they're just living in their own home, and it may seem extreme to us, but it's not extreme to them because they're adapted for the particular climate they're growing in. But when I think about it, what is an extreme environment from the perspective of a plant? I think it's the kind of habitat where very few species can grow. The species that do grow there are adapted for that environment. And in our work documenting the alpine plants, we look across the landscape and we go to all the different habitats represented by these arrows. And you can tell from looking at those arrows that the color of the vegetation is different in each location. And that alone tells you about the diversity in the alpine. But today we're going to be talking about these tiny little cushion plants, the moss campion, and it would be growing up on the ridge tops where very few other plants can grow. So there's very few competitors for it. Down in the valleys where the snow accumulates a little bit more is the wet meadows, and that's why it looks like a lusher green. So let's go to the next slide, Liz. So the alpine environment is quite widespread in British Columbia partly because we're further north, and also because we have a lot of high mountains. And as I mentioned earlier, there comes a point on a mountain where trees cannot grow. It's simply too cold for them, but other vegetation takes over. And so in this image here, the lightest color you see there is the alpine tundra of British Columbia. And it's concentrated in the north, but it extends all the way down the mountains of the Coast Range and the mountains and the Rocky Mountains, wherever the elevation is high above the trees. Okay, next one, Liz. So we talked a little bit about, already mentioned how tiny the plants are, and here's a quarter. This is a Canadian quarter for those of you in the US. And that's a tiny little plant that, I mean, you can see how tiny it is. And this illustrates the dwarf nature of a lot of alpine species. They germinate quite quickly, and many of them are perennials, and then they produce a flower, and before they can finish their growing season, often it's too cold for the seeds to form. So it's a very short growing season. Next. Here's just another plant, different lineage of plants, also with a very short growing, short cushion form. Those stems are maybe 3 or 4 inches tall, 5 to 6 centimeters tall. And yeah, the plant, that cushion growth form maintains some warmth inside the center of the plant. It minimizes damage from the wind, and it also helps to retain moisture. And we often don't realize it, but alpine environments really are desert-like. They don't get a lot of precipitation in the summer. A lot of the snow that falls in the winter gets blown off the ridge tops, as that earlier image showed. So retaining moisture is critical. Next.
And it looks like they're growing in rocks, Ken.
Yeah, so these plants are, you know, they are really, really hardy. There's not a lot of plants that could grow here. Yeah, you can see there's very little soil, true soil, but there is soil starting to accumulate in that kind of cushion there. So this is my favorite plant, and that was what we saw in the video already, moss campion. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not a moss. This is actually related to carnations, believe it or not. Next. And it's really a critical plant in the alpine environments, and every one of those clumps of vegetation you see is actually started perhaps dozens, perhaps hundreds of years ago from a little clump of moss campion. Just a single plant got established there. And you can see that there's no other plants growing between the clumps. So this illustrates how well adapted moss campion is for this alpine environment. And once it gets established, you can see, you can maybe make out that there's lots of grasses, there's probably lichens and mosses, all kinds of other species that are growing on that cushion that was established by moss campion. Next. This gives you an idea of the kind of the cushion growth form, and just imagine wind going across that plant is going to do very little damage because there's not much of it sticking up. But you can also see the cushion is formed over decades, probably, trapping a little bit of soil, beginning a little bit of mineral soil, and then you can see some grass plants are starting to get established on the cushion. Next.
It's like a little community.
It's a little community. And it's, you know, as probably you're already aware, plants are just one part of an ecosystem. So the flowers produce nectar and pollen for insects. And in the soil, there's bacteria and fungi and many other species that all are interconnected to this plant and all the other plants in the environment up there. And we do see other creatures up there. This is a hoary marmot.
I don't know why I did that, sorry.
Yeah, a hoary marmot. And I think the next image is a bee. So that's kind of a quick summary of the alpine environment, Liz.
And the PowerPoint suddenly started changing slides on its own. So thanks, Ken. Thank you. So we will have a little time, I meant to say, at the end to ask Ken some specific questions. But you've brought some samples to show us here. So I'm gonna just put on our document camera, and then do you want me to move over there? Okay, let's see. Now and then we're going to do a drawing activity. So, and I meant to remind you at the beginning, sorry. So if you're in a classroom, maybe get those paper and pencil ready, or if you're at home, whatever, we're going to do that next. But first, Ken's going to show us a specimen from the botany collection here at the museum. I'm going to turn this a little so you can see. I'm going to straighten it out a little bit.
So we have in our collection here, we have 225,000 specimens.
I'm going to zoom in a little bit if you
okay
there.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have 225,000 specimens, and this is an example I mentioned earlier of that some plants have related to moss campion are much taller, and you can imagine this plant, which is about 16 inches tall, or about 30 centimeters, 35 centimeters tall. And a strong wind on that ridge top that we saw in the earlier slide that was very kind of gray and stony on a ridge top, that plant would get snapped right away and it would never produce flowers. And of course, the flowers are critical for the life cycle of the plant because after the flowers have matured, then they begin to form seeds. So here's a related plant to Moss campion. It's has the same scientific name, a different species. And it's an example of a related species that is not at all adapted for the high wind environment of the alpine.
Wow, it is so tall and it's related. That's really neat. So I'm going to stop moving it and I'm going to settle down here on this label. All right, just trying to make it straight. Sorry about that. And I was going to ask Ken, because this is a typical specimen, the way you have them in the collections. Could you maybe say a little something about the label and the kinds of information that you have on a specimen label there?
Sure. So we share this information with people all over the world. And this is a standard herbarium label. Every university has a collection like this and many museums do. So you can see the plant family. This is a unit of taxonomy. You can see the accession number, which is also stamped here. Every specimen in our collection and in all of the other collections in the museum have a unique number. This line here, this says det, means it was determinavit. That means it was Hans Romer who identified it. And in the botanical community in British Columbia, we know Hans is an outstanding botanist. And the date he identified it. The location is important to record, and especially the latitude and the longitude and the elevation. And all of that information confers, all of that data confers information about the habitat in which the plant was growing. Often, we do include some comments about the habitat. Was it a wet environment? What were some of the common species? What was the steepness of the slope? Was it facing north, south, east, west? This particular label is lacking some of that really useful habitat information. And then you can see the two people that collected it, where it says Call, that's collector, Hans Romer and John Pindermoss. John used to be the collection manager here at the museum. And this is their unique field number that probably matches some notes in Hans's notebook and then the date they collected it. And here's a little label that I looked at the same specimen and I determined that it was a variety of the same species. And that's just a little more finer classification than just to the species level.
Right, that's a lot of information with one specimen. And I guess without all that data and information, it's not as useful to scientists, right?
That's right. So the specimen itself is of use. You can make observations of it. You could remove a leaf and extract DNA from it. But the real value in documenting distributions is all that information on the label. And we share this globally on a website called GBIF.
Hey, thanks, Ken. Now I think we're gonna draw some Moss campion. So you can get out your paper and your pencil. And I think what we'll do is not say too much about the plants at first. And we're gonna get you to draw. And then Ken will tell us a little bit, something more about what we see here.
You can just,
Oh.
yeah, you can fold that under if you
Okay,
want.
yeah, there we go. Let me just do that, straighten it out a little bit. Do you want this on here or no?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, and I'm gonna go in. So, yeah, we wanted to do this activity too because illustrations are used quite a bit by scientists. And my understanding is one of the reasons is because it allows you to really look closely at something that you're trying to learn about, right? And if you draw it, you're spending all that time and really looking at the fine detail. I'm gonna just not make you motion sick, but go in a little bit more and move. Which one should we look at? Maybe, how about these two? We can zero in on them. Down a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. All right. I'm going to give you, go ahead, start drawing if you haven't already, those two. I'm going to go for a minute. I'm going to look on my timing on my phone. We're doing okay for time still. And so this is, nobody's marking this. You don't have to be a brilliant artist. This is using your eyes to see what you can draw. What kind of features of the plant do you notice? You might want to start with just an outline, whatever you see that interests you. And then we're gonna flip them over afterwards. We'll see what's on the other side. And we can even go in closer too after our minute's up. So yeah, and actually we will share a link at the end for our learning portal. We have a number of pages on our learning portal that are about how scientists here at the museum use illustration to help them study fish and marine invertebrates and insects. And yeah, it can be a very useful tool. Okay, there we go. That's our minute is up. All right, before I flip it though, Ken, I'm just gonna go in a little, see how close we can go in here. Ooh, well, maybe. Let me just make this over a little bit. Which one do you want?
Yeah, that
Yeah,
one
okay.
highlights the
Yeah.
flowers better.
Yeah. Okay, and let's push it down. Let's do that. Okay. Another minute to draw this close in. So here's another angle for you. Go ahead, starting now. Imagine sometimes too, especially as a botanist, you might be drawing a plant or looking at a plant that you don't recognize. You don't know. Have you ever discovered species?
I have discovered some species in Hawaii.
Ooh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. I
Interesting.
named 3 new species.
Oh, neat. Well, that's a nice place.
I
to do
named
it in.
one after a hurricane.
Oh. Okay, if we
That's
have
how it
time
was.
in the Q&A, if anybody wants to know more about that, I
It was,
love it.
it was discovered because of a hurricane.
Okay, about 25 more seconds there. On this, you can really see some of those edges of that plant too. Interesting. And the colors now have faded, obviously, from when it was, that must happen a lot from when it was picked,
Yeah.
but you can still
All
make
the,
out those flowers.
yeah, even though these are pressed and dried, you can still make out the critical features that help in identification.
Okay, that's our minute up. Before we ask Ken a little bit about that plant, I'm going to gently flip it over just so you can see. And I'll go out a bit. Oh, wow. Okay. Let's do this. We have time. 1 more minute. You get to draw the underside, and then we'll pick Ken's brain about this plant. Because I'm curious what I'm looking at here. There's some light and some dark. What is going on there? And I'm curious if there's actually some soil in there.
There's even actually a bit of a grass growing out of it
Oh.
right here, growing out of that clump.
Okay.
You want me to see something about the?
Yeah, in about 30 seconds.
Okay.
And we'll see if anybody has any particular questions, but yeah, we definitely want to hear a little bit more about this.
Yeah.
I'm curious how many insects are up there in the alpine. I love that butterfly picture.
Yeah.
Okay, 10 seconds, finish up your drawing. Okay. Okay, there we go. Now I could, if you want, we can change the camera and you can hold it in your hand, or do you want to leave it here while you talk about
I
it?
could leave it there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So one thing you can see, you may not have interpreted it properly, is there's the bases of the leaves, old, dead, dried up leaves are making up a lot of this clump is the dried up leaves. And then,
Sorry, Ken, is that the lighter bit?
yeah, the lighter bit is the base of the leaves that are dried out. You can see the green leaves up here are that lighter color. And then in between the little columns of tiny little plants that make up that clump, you can see the darker color there is particles of soil. And so this is how the tree of the moss campion is growing. It's creating this clump, and then you may not be able to make it out easily, but there are roots. Some of these really finer structures here, those are the roots of each little moss campion plant, and they're all growing together in this clump.
Now go ahead. If anybody has any specific questions about this moss campion or that related species that Ken put up there just before, feel free to type your questions in there. We can see the chat. So what can you tell us about the flowers? I know that they're not as pretty now. They're a little bit faded, but are the flowers of the moss campion, is it what you would call a vascular plant?
This is what's called a vascular plant. It was a vascular flowering plant. So vascular plants are divided into ferns, conifers, and flowering plants. And yeah, you can see the flowers here. And if we really wanted to study the flower structure, we could actually dip the flower in boiling water and it would rehydrate, and we could see the features of the flower quite easily.
And do you do that sometimes to
Yeah,
study them? Oh,
yeah.
okay.
And for teaching sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you can see many of the green leaves that are older, or that are the new plants. Some of the, the leaves that have dried out down here, that could have been dozens of years ago because it grows so slow.
Okay, that's interesting. It's so growing. And I see Tobias has a question. Why are the flowers dark purple?
Yeah, that is a good question, and it's just the way the plant is. Its evolutionary lineage. It has those dark purple flowers. It probably is an adaptation to attract certain kinds of pollinators that are sensitive to color.
Okay, I was wondering. Yeah. I wonder who it attracts with that color. Interesting.
And we saw the butterfly.
Yeah.
And long tubular flowers like that are adapted for butterflies that have long tongues.
Okay, thank you for that question. And why are there bumps and holes in the clump? Well, I think that's a little bit what you talked about, isn't it?
Yeah, the bumps, the pale bumps, and that's a great observation, are the dried up leaves from many previous years. And the holes are, even though it grows as a clump, but there are, imagine it's, many individual stems densely crowded together. And so there are gaps between those little stems.
So sorry, let me try and point this out here. So do you mean like, say the bottom of this here is like oldest, and then as you go up to the top, you're getting newer? Like this is all part of the same little growth here.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
So why are the flowers so small? These are actually, for alpine plants, these flowers are actually relatively big. But again, considering how short the growing season is, it's important to produce a flower in a relatively short amount of time, and the smaller the flower, the quicker it can be produced. And the plants are small because they're adapted for that windy environment. And if they were tall, they would get blown over quite easily.
Okay, thank you for those questions. I'm going to do this. So, sorry. I was trying to change the camera, not share with you. There we go. Okay. So that moss just going to reiterate what we were talking about before. So is the moss campion, like a lot of the alpine plants, it's perfectly adapted to that environment because it can grow in a short season. So it's a really short season, and because it's really windy, so being low to the ground helps. It's not going to get blown around, and it can stand the cold. And did you say, I might have missed this, how long is the growing season?
The growing season is 6 to 8 weeks. And, it could be that the snow stays a long time, although on the ridgetop, it probably got blown off. But you think about temperature, it can be below freezing just about any day of the year. And plants don't grow well when it's really, really cold. So the growing season is 6 to 8 weeks in most parts of the alpine.
That is short.
Yeah.
Some places in Canada and near the big cities are a little bit longer than that, but yeah. Okay, so now we have a few minutes left. And if anybody has any questions about other alpine plants, about what it's like to be up in the alpine, Ken has spent lots of time up there, or you want to ask about the species that Ken discovered. How did you find that you could revive the moss camp? Okay, so the question was, how did you find out that you could revive moss campion with hot water?
So just to be clear, it doesn't bring it back to life. But I've taught university plant identification classes in the wintertime. And so if you want to have students if you want to have material for the students to dissect and learn about the structure of the flower, you have to collect it in the summer and press it and dry it. And so what I learned is in the wintertime, you can dip those flowers in hot water, and then you can look at the structure of the flowers, the number of petals, the number of reproductive parts, and it actually, they rehydrate to the extent that they're almost as good as fresh. So that's how I learned about it.
Neat.
Desperation.
Good tip. Pro tip.
Yeah.
Pro tip for studying flowers. So go ahead and you can type in any other questions you have for Ken. Where's your favorite
alpine place
in
Yeah.
British Columbia? Ooh.
That's a really good question. It's a hard one to answer, but I can think of places that I've been that were very, very remote. Most places I've been are very remote, but I would say some locations in Northern Rockies Provincial Park, very, very remote, amazing wildlife and an amazing diversity of species as well. Some plants.
Whereabouts is that?
So we're talking about 54 degrees north of Prince George, which is in the center of the province. And one of the reasons that's one of my favorite places is we found a plant that only occurs in 2 or 3 other places in British Columbia. So those kinds of distributions are very puzzling, and interpreting and understanding why those distributions are interesting.
Is that pretty close to the Alberta border?
No, it's more central BC,
Okay.
between Alberta and the Pacific coast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How many years have you worked in the Alpine?
Well, my dad was an alpine plant ecologist, so I'm 64, so probably about 63 years. But in this job here, probably 25 years. Yeah.
Okay. And how did you decide to become a botanist? I think we just got a clue.
Yeah.
Did you always like plants?
I always liked plants. Yeah.
Well, so did you go on trips with your dad?
So when I was little, I was very fortunate. I grew up, my mother was a biologist, my dad was a botanist, and yeah, he took me on field trips and with his students, and my dad was a very patient, kind man, and I could ask him the name of the same plant over and over, and he would patiently tell me the same name.
So you were
Just grew up
exposed
doing
at an early age.
Very early.
Yeah. Being exposed to nature at an early age is always good. Any tips for observing plants when we go outside, even if we're not in the Alpine? Nice question. Thanks.
That's a really nice question. And I would say just sit still and watch and see what kind of insects come and visit the plant. If you have the opportunity to go back to the same place, day after day after day, or every week or so, you can just kind of watch how it's developing. Yeah, just spending time and watching and observing.
Yeah, and you're probably aware there's some really good apps now. I mean, there's fantastic guidebooks which people still use, and there's many for our area here, and wherever you are, there's always check with your local natural history society or museum, and they can recommend. But there's fantastic apps now, like iNaturalist is really if you haven't used it, it's pretty popular. And even if you don't know something, the other users on there can go in and help you identify it, and then they will get sort of corroborated by scientists, and they'll say, yes, you have seen this or this or this, and it shows maps, and that's a free open source app, so really fun to use, iNaturalist. Thanks for these questions. Yeah, there was a question here. Oh yeah, what were the names of the species you discovered? Can you say those?
Lysimachia inikii. There was a hurricane. This is in Hawaii. There was a hurricane in 1993 in Hawaii, and it blew down a fragment of a plant in the genus Lysimachia, which is the loosestrife. And it hadn't been seen before because it grew up on these vertical cliffs. And I grew up the seeds in a greenhouse at the University of British Columbia, and it was seen in flower for the first time in Canada, even though it's a Hawaiian plant.
Okay, well, that's one of them. What are the other two?
Lysimachia scopulorum was another one.
We're going to be Googling these because we know this Latin spelling in our head.
I believe it was Lysimachia filifolia, but that was a few years ago.
We could make you print one of them out in Latin. Could you do it?
Write it
out in Latin for us. Well,
okay.
give us one of them. Here you go.
Okay.
Let's
see.
See maybe just over here. Yeah, there you go. And then we'll get him to sit down out of the way. Oh, unique.
Iniki. So the word iniki means strong pangs of love. And I thought that was a good name for a plant.
In Latin.
In Latin.
Love it. Love it.
Actually, iniki is probably a Hawaiian word, but Lysimachia is
Oh,
Latin.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Okay, we've got some more questions here. Ooh, why are there dark purple sprouts? Is that maybe the flower you were looking at, referring to, Tobias? I think maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that was the only
yeah.
purple that we saw. So that's probably the flowers on the
Yeah.
moss campion that you're looking at. What other species rely on moss campion? You mentioned there was a grass growing out of it. That's interesting.
Yeah, I have a if you included the moss, the lichens and mosses and the vascular plants that grow on those large cushions that I showed that start from a moss campion plant, it would be in the dozens.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Would it depend like where? Like, is it different species in different alpine?
I think you would see some differences for sure. Yeah. Because we do find different vegetation in different parts of the province, but many of them get established on those cushions of moss campion.
Interesting. And somebody, sorry, I can't read your whole name, but you're saying Picture is also a good app. Is that what it's called? I don't know that one. So that might be another botany or nature ID app. Okay, question here. If the plant dies, can it be revived? I'm guessing she means for a specimen.
Yeah, so for this species, it can't be, but there's another plant called the resurrection plant, and it's a kind of club moss, and it grows in the desert, and it doesn't totally die, but it totally dries up, and it closes in upon itself, and it can stay in that stage just barely alive for many, many years, and then you can put it in water, and it comes back to life. But it's not moss campion. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. Amazing world of plants. Okay, well, thank you for all those questions. If there aren't any more, we will wrap up. And because I'm going to give you an email address, you can always follow up with us and we can answer. But it looks like those are all the questions. Thank you for that. Yeah, I just want to share. There it is. There we go. Yeah, so this is, there we go. Here's my question slide. There's me. So feel free to email me, lcrocker@royalbcmuseum.bc.ca if you have any follow-up questions for Ken, and I can get them to him. And also, we do digital field trips here at the museum. So if you wanted to book a program so that it's just you in your classroom, or you and a group of friends, or you in a community group, or where you live or whatever, please contact me and we can do that for you. We offer on our website all different topics: botany, First Peoples innovations, and we have one about mammoths. So there's that, and our learning portal, which I mentioned. So here we do have some, sorry, it's a big long URL there, but you could just Google alpine plants, learning portal, and RBCM, and you would probably get there. But the learning portal has all kinds of wonderful content there about how to explore, how to learn about British Columbia through the work of the Royal BC Museum, both the human and natural history of the province. I encourage you to go there. And that's it. Oh yeah, there's too, you could contact us through learning if you wanted to book a digital field trip with us. Okay, and I see there's something in that's all my slides. Oh, can I say the email address again? Yeah, sorry. Oh, the screen was black. I'm sorry. I don't know why. Weird. So sorry about that. Yeah, so, and I'll type it. I don't know if you can see it. No, you can't see it if I type it in the chat, but it's L Crocker, LCROCKER at Royal BC Museum, all one word, .bc.ca. And I think if you came through Streamable Learning, it probably has how to contact us through the description. Otherwise, yeah, you could send an email to learning@royalbcmuseum.bc.ca and we get that as well, or to L Crocker. Okay. Yeah, I can put it up. I don't know why I haven't. Okay, is that did you, thank you. There we go. You got it. Okay. Because I don't want to try again if the screen's going black, and I think I know what's going on there. So I apologize for that. Oh, can the moss campion live in really dry places?
That is a good question. Yeah, I couldn't say for sure. I mean, I did mention that alpine environments are a type of desert. And because it does kind of retain moisture in that cushion growth form, it could grow in really dry places, but I would not try to grow it in a hot and dry place. It's just not adapted for like a lowland desert environment.
It likes the cold.
It likes,
those
it's
alpine
adapted for the
areas.
cold. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. So thank you so much for joining us. And this is being recorded and is going to be posted at Streamable Learning. And I think we're going to post it on our website as well. So you can always look at it later and tell friends to come back and look at it. So thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ken Marr. Today was very interesting.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Hey, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.